I wanted to keep the My World sample app as simple as possible so that we can focus on how to build any app with Xcode. That is, any iOS app. Now, going back to Albert Einstein, I found a better way to say it. Everything should be as simple as it is, but not simpler. Well, building any type of iPad app is not simple by any means. If you have an idea for a new iPad app, you probably want to learn how to create it from scratch, using the Xcode templates to get started, which is certainly the fastest way to get started, just like it is for developing an iPhone app. And if you already developed an iPhone app, you may want to reuse some of the code. It's true that iPhone apps already run on the iPad in compatibility mode, that is, in a black box in the center of the display, or scaled up to full screen, but that's not the way iPad users want to use their apps. Some iPad app ideas work only in the iPad form factor, such as Flipboard and the Daily. Neither one of them would be as unique and interesting to use if they were on the iPhone with such a small display. The iPad experience is so different from the iPhone experience that you need to consider redesigning it to make sure the app looks and feels like it was designed especially for the iPad. This is crucial because people have high expectations for the apps they choose to install on their iPads. If your app feels like it was designed for an iPhone or for the web, people are less likely to use it on their iPads. And iPad and iPhone users are both accustomed to the appearance and behavior of the built-in apps, so they tend to expect similar experiences in the apps they download. You should adapt your images and artwork to the iPad display size. Users tend to expect higher quality images and artwork in iPad apps than they do in the iPhone apps. You should never consider just scaling up the images and graphics from an iPhone app to fill the iPad screen. If you've already developed an iPhone app, you can use the same project in Xcode. Simply modify some of the code as needed to create the iPad version. In other words, you can port the iPhone app to the iPad, which means that you can modify the code to work better on an iPad, but it's still the same code. The code frameworks in the SDK work with iOS on both devices, so all you really need to do is modify the code for the iPad user experience and display. Xcode makes the porting process easier by automating much of the setup process for your project. You have a choice in how you use Xcode to develop your iPad app, either as a separate iPad-specific app or as a single app that works on both the iPad and the iPhone, which is called a universal app. Device-specific apps are designed specifically for the iOS device, iPhone, which includes the iPod Touch, or iPad, and any new iOS device that comes down the pike with a different form factor. Creating device-specific apps gives you the advantage of reusing code from your existing iPhone app while also taking less development and testing time than developing a universal app. For example, the New York Times created 2 device-specific apps in order to take more advantage of the specific device characteristics, either an iPhone version, which offers a mobile app display with icons for different sections, and an iPad version, which offers a newspaper-like experience with a larger screen with a popover menu for different sections. You can always, of course, use separate Xcode projects to create separate apps for the iPad and iPhone. Essentially, this means starting from scratch for each one. But if you have to rewrite large portions of your code anyway, creating a separate Xcode project for the iPad is usually simpler, and you can work with more than one project in the Xcode workspace, and copy and paste code between projects easily. In fact, creating a separate project for the iPad version gives you the freedom to tailor your code for the iPad without having to worry about whether that code runs on other devices. If your app's data is tightly integrated with the view that draws the data, or if you just need the freedom to add more features to the iPad version, this is the way to go, and you're going to see how that works in a minute. Now, whether you create device-specific apps in one project or create separate projects, you still end up with separate iPhone and iPad apps to manage. And that, of course, means different pricing if you want, but also the fact that you have to keep both products in the App Store. The only way to have only one app to manage for both the iPhone and iPad, and of course that also means having only one app in the store at one price, is to create a universal app. A universal app is optimized for both the iPad and the iPhone, and the iPod Touch, of course, which is just like the iPhone. Creating a universal app gives you the opportunity to sell one app that supports all device types. This choice makes the download experience simpler for users. You set one price, and the user can use the same copy of the app on both their iPhone and the iPad. If you want to develop a universal app, keep in mind that you still need to adapt your design for each device. You can use the same user interface elements for both the iPhone and the iPad, but the layout usually differs dramatically due to the iPad's larger display. For example, in SoundHound, which is a universal app, the iPhone version shows a large tap button and icons for the What's Hot section and other sections. But the iPad version shows the What's Hot section and other sections on the main screen, and it puts the tap button in a popover. But it's not hard to develop a universal version. Xcode simplifies the process of updating your main interface from an iPhone target to a universal target. And we're going to do it both ways so that you understand how easy it can be either way. I'll talk more about the universal app aspects later. Steve Jobs, he really said it best. Design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works. That's why you need to know how an iPad app works before trying to design a user interface for one. And since Apple knows best, it helps a lot to start off with the code and objects in Apple's templates and sample projects. For one thing, you need to consider the memory limitations and display orientation of the iPad. That's why the Xcode templates are so useful. They take care of the display and memory management so that you can focus on what your app can do. Most iPad apps start off with a view, and the view-based application template creates a skeleton for a fully functioning iPad app. So here we are in Xcode, and we're going to create a new project for the iPad app. So I'm going to click Create a New Xcode Project. And the first thing that pops up is the Choose a Template dialog. So the template you select for your Xcode project provides the skeleton of a user interface. For example, we've already selected the view-based application template. The view-based application template offers a view and a view controller that you can customize. As it says down here, it provides a great starting point for an application that uses a single view, which is what we're going to do with the iPad version of My World. It provides a view controller to manage the view and a nib file that contains the view. Simple. And as you can see, there are other templates, such as the navigation-based template, which is useful if you want to use a navigation controller. We've already used the utility application template for the iPhone version of My World. And of course, there's the split view-based application template, which is really specifically for the iPad. But we're going to go with the view-based application template. Make sure you choose the appropriate template so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Before you start coding, examine how the template's interface works and how to add your custom interface objects and graphics. I've selected view-based application for my template and I click Next. First thing you notice is that we have to name the product. Well, I was going to call it MyPad, but there is already an app called MyPad for the iPad. It's an app that uses Facebook. So I'm going to have to call it something else. So I did a search and it's okay, we can call it MyPad World. And you see here that we have a device family pop-up menu. And this is where we could choose iPad. Now we're all set, we click Next. Here we'll create the project. We'll establish a new folder and hit the Create button. When you start a project with the view-based application template, you get a main window.xib. It's a view using a white background, scaled to fill the entire main window. If we close the dock here, and we can see it. And we can scroll at the bottom to see the sides, and if we scroll to the top, there's our status bar with the battery. This is, of course, because we chose iPad in the pop-up menu when creating this app based on this template. So as you can see, MyPad World, simply from choosing a template, is already set up to run with iOS version 4.3, device iPad. It has all the information it needs to actually run. It's got a header file, a view controller implementation file, and a view controller nib, which is also, at this point, just a blank white background view. Now we can even run the project right now and see what it looks like. We choose iPad 4.3 simulator, and we click the Run button. It builds successfully, and it shows us the white screen. But here's what's useful about this. You see there is a status bar at the top. If we rotate in the simulator, we choose Hardware Rotate Right, you'll see that the view automatically moves the status bar to where it should be. And rotate left to bring it back up to vertical orientation. So it goes to horizontal and vertical orientations automatically. It handles that in the code, as you'll see. So we will actually stop this program. Now remember, since programs are still running in the background, we have to physically remove it. What we can do is simply go back to the project and click the stop button. Then when we go back to the simulator, we can do a reset. iOS simulator reset. And we can quit the simulator. After a user launches your app, the functionality provided in the UI Kit framework manages most of the application's infrastructure. Part of the initialization process I mentioned before involves setting up the main run loop, which is here in the supporting files. And this main run loop and its event handling code is the responsibility of the UI application object. We can see in our help screen, UI application main is the function called in the main entry point to create the application object and the application delegate and set up the event cycle. So we've got that code in there, no problem. And when the app is on screen, it's driven by external events, such as fingers touching buttons. But it's the main window.xib file here that causes the application's delegate, window, and view controller instances to get created at runtime. Fortunately, the main window.xib is provided with the template. So is the main view controller for iPad World right here, which also has a white background, as you can see by scrolling, and the status bar at the top. This iPad World view controller is set to be the application's view controller. That's where we're going to put our code to control the view, which is right here in the header of iPad World view controller and iPad World view controller implementation file. As you can see, there's lots of code in there, and we're going to get into seeing that in a minute.